Today we're going to learn how to make this fun patchwork owl, which is going to teach us how to use some patterns, some masks, and even some 3D drawing techniques. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is create a not US paper, I'm used to Photoshop, a letter-sized document in Illustrator. And we are going to start drawing with our pencil tool with this project. Now with every drawing tool you have the option of a fill, which is this solid color, or a stroke, which is this square donut. The fill, of course, is the interior, and the stroke is the outline of the object. Now, we don't want a stroke, so if you see anything here other than this red slash, click on it and click the red slash down here. For our fill color, we actually want this kind of brownish gray, and you can find that in your swatches over here, kind of in this bottom row of color. So this brownish gray is kind of a perfect owl color. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our owl, and our owl is kind of, the shape is basically kind of like a teardrop with straighter sides, and it kind of, the end kind of curves over. It looks kind of a funny shape. That's not too bad. And I'm going to zoom in here though and look at these points where my pencil tool started and ended. And you'll notice that I've got this little hiccup here. Now there's a way to fix that. All I have to do is go into my direct selection tool and click on this anchor point, hold the shift key down, click on the other anchor point, then go to the top and align that horizontally and align it vertically. And it just pulls those two anchor points into alignment. So now we have this perfect shape and it's looking good. So first thing we're going to do before we do anything else is add some shading to this, and we're just going to do this with some gradient mesh. So I'm going to go into my gradient mesh tool and I'm going to click 1, 2, 3 diagonally. So 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to go into my direct selection tool, this white arrow. A is the keyboard shortcut for that. And I'm going to hold down my shift key as I click each of these anchor points. So it's a little tough to see. If you need to zoom in, you can do a Command plus, and that'll zoom you right in so you can see a little bit more. I'm going to go to my swatches, and after I've selected all of those, I'm going to click on the black swatch. Now it looks like I've missed a few actually, so I'm going to go back in and select those again, and then do that over again. And this time, I actually selected too many. So go back and deselect those. Gee whiz. And there we go. Finally, we have it the way that we want it. I'm also going to select the, click off of this before you click back on so that that will allow you to select the ones you want. But I'm going to go back here and also select the ones on this side. And I'm not going to make them quite as dark, but I do want to have the appearance of this kind of wrapping backwards. So I'm going to select these and double click on my fill color and just pull my cursor down a little bit in this color picker and then hit OK. And again here I have selected too much. Now if that happens, easy little remedy to that. Click, hold down the shift key, click, then if you hit I, the eyedropper, you can just go in and click that medium color that you originally had. All right. So that is looking pretty good, but it's not looking very patchworky. It's not looking like fabric. So I'm going to add a pattern to this, and I'm going to do this in a couple of ways. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get my rectangle tool, and I need to draw a rectangle over this entire image. Now, what happens is that it hides what we're seeing, but we're going to fix this very quickly. I'm going to go in, and I have my fill on top here, so I'm going to set my fill. And I'm going to set my fill with a pattern. So if I go to the Swatch Libraries menu here, go down to Patterns, and go to Basic Graphics, Textures. And then I'm going to just click around here and see which patterns I like. Now there's a variety of different patterns. You can kind of experiment and just try to find something that you like. There's also other patterns that you can play around with, but I find that these are the best for this project. So once you have something that you like, we're going to do something that's slightly odd. We're going to hit Command X. And what that did was it cut that shape that we had. And now we're going to go into our transparency window. And if you don't see this window, you can go into your window options up here and then go down to transparency and make sure that that's checked. Once you're in your transparency window, we're going to go back to our direct selection or regular selection tool, click onto our shape here, and then select Make Mask. Now it looks like our shape just disappeared, but what really has happened is we've put this black mask over the top, and we're actually going to change this mask so that it will actually expose our image. So I'm going to click onto that mask, do a Command V to paste that rectangle. I'm going to move it to where I want it. And then we still can't see our image, but that's because we have this clip option checked. So if I unclip that, or I unchecked that, then I see my pattern. Now what we're actually seeing here is all of these little pattern pieces have actually been cut out of our larger shape. So it's kind of a fun way to add a pattern to just a basic shape, and it's just kind of a different skill that a lot of people don't use the masks when they're first starting out. So it's kind of fun to play around with. So now one thing to notice though about masks, if I continue to work, I'm actually selected in the mask itself. So if I look here in my layer, it says opacity mask instead of the actual shapes that I'm working on. So if I go back into my opacity window, I need to make sure that I click on this gray part before I do anything else. And once I've done that, I can go ahead and move on. So now if I go back to my layers window here, I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to lock my old layer, my layer 1 with this shape on it. So now I'm ready to go ahead and do some other shapes. I'm going to start out, go back to my pencil tool, and instead of this patterned fill, I'm going to double click in the fill and select a slightly off-white color. So you can go up to this corner, almost all the way into the corner, but as long as it doesn't say FFFFFF, then you have a slightly off-white. And if that's the case, you can hit OK. And then we're going to draw the face shape here, which is basically kind of the shape of an apple, or like a heart without a point. So if we do this, then we're looking pretty good. I'm going to zoom in, Command plus, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did with my last shape. I'm going to click here on these last anchor points, or the last and first, hold the Shift key down to get them both, and then I'm going to horizontally align them and vertically align them. So those are the middle options for each of these. And now that's a nice perfect shape. So now one other thing that we're going to do with this is we're going to take the shape that we've just created, and I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to do that just by hitting Command C, and then I want to paste it in place. So to do that, I'm going to do Command Shift V. And when I do that, it's not going to look like much happened because I just pasted the same shape right over the same place. But what I'm going to do now is flip my fill and my stroke, because I want to create a special stroke, and I want that to be on the shape that I just pasted. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this, and then I'm going to select the stroke so that it's on top. Now with this, I need to change the color so that it allows this part to kind of pop out. So I'm going to choose black, and you can just barely see that stroke now. So I'm going to need to take the stroke weight up. So I'm going to take that up to maybe 4 here. I'm going to change my profile. And the last thing that I'm going to do is go into my stroke window here and check dashed line. Now right now it's at 12 point, which is looking pretty good. If we zoom in here, we can see that we have these kind of flat ends, which for stitching might not be too bad. You could also, though, try this rounded end. Either way is fine, whatever you prefer. And if you wanted to play around with some different width profiles, you could. I will say I don't like to do too many of these really directional width profiles, because you can see we lose about one whole side when we're making these shapes with those outlines. So you may want to stick with something that has a little bit of variation to it. If you like what you see, you can just go ahead and close that. And then we're going to do something a little weird here. I'm going to actually go into my scale tool. So S is the keyboard shortcut for that. And I'm going to click and just pull this, holding the Shift key down so that I can just expand it a little bit. There we go. because I want that to kind of be stitched around the outside of that white. So that's why we kind of created two different layers or two different objects here to do this. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to need to add a pattern into this eventually too, but I'm actually going to wait here and go ahead and continue on drawing. Now when I continue drawing, I'm going to go into my direct selection tool. I'm going to click just off to the side so that I can reset things without changing what I've done. Then I'm going to go ahead and just flip again so that I have no fill and a stroke. Go ahead and select, maybe I'll actually stick with the white this time for the stitches down here. And I'm going to go back to my stroke, select dashed, and take my point size up, and then just try a different width profile. And I'm going to go to my pencil tool, and from the edge here I'm going to draw some little wings. So just some little stitched wings here on either side. So that's looking pretty good. All right, and then I'm going to flip this again. Whoops. Go to your direct selection A, click off, then you can flip it again. Go back to our pencil tool, and we're going to draw kind of a little belly area here. All right, and again, as we've been doing, you might want to come in here and select these two anchor points and align them so that they just come together. Now, if you want to keep this in this color, you can. You can play around with those colors. You could try a slight hue if you'd like to. Anything is fine. So I'll go ahead and leave it like that. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I need to add my stitches to this area down here as well. So I'm going to do the same technique that I used up here. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate, so that's Command C, and then Command Shift V to paste. I'm going to flip these two, change this to change my stroke, so I need to select the stroke on top, change the stroke to a black, go to my stroke options, change the size, create a dashed line, and create an interesting width profile. Final thing that I need to do is go to my scale tool, hold down the shift key, and just barely pull that outside of that edge. All right, that's looking pretty good. So now I'm going to go ahead and add some patterns to these. So now I don't want to add some patterns to the stitches, I just want to add them to the white and the blue here. So I'm going to make sure that I select on those actual shapes and grab my rectangle tool here, draw over the top. Actually, I should have, I'm just going to select those shapes later, so it doesn't really matter too much. And then I'm going to go back to my patterns and just kind of play around here. So, oops, I'm getting them on the stroke here. If that happens, you can flip them so that you get them on the fill. So let's try that again. So you can see there's lots of fun patterns. I actually kind of like that one for the top part. So once you have one again that you like, you can do a Command X to copy that or to cut it. And then again, we'll go into A, our direct selection, click on the face here, go to our transparency, make mask, click on the black, Command V, take the clip off, and then move that on that mask to set that over what we want. Once you're done, click back on the gray. All right, so I can do the same thing down here. I'm going to click onto this area. I'm going to make mask. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste the same image that I had up top. And I'm going to take the clip off, move this down. And then after I've done that, I'm going to go in and maybe select some different patterns. So I like that. That looks cute. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my transparency, click on the gray area, and now I'm ready to move on. So now I have a lot of cute little patterns on there. Now another thing that you might want to do if you see that, like let's say we go back to the selection, if we think that this pattern is a little bit too much, you can go back to your opacity, click on the mask itself, and take the opacity of that mask down so that you don't see as much of that pattern. But I actually, Maybe I will take it down just a little bit. I don't mind it too much though. All right, so that's looking pretty good. We're going to go ahead and add some buttons now. We need some button eyes. So, oh, I didn't click off the mask. Let me go back and click onto the gray and then go back to my layers. Now I'm going to go ahead and lock the two shapes that I just made on this layer 2, and I'm going to add a new layer down here. Zoom in a little bit here. And now I'm going to use my ellipse tool to draw my button. Now when you use your ellipse tool to draw a perfect circle, you're going to hold your shift key down and draw that. And I'm going to use my selection tool to move it to where I want. And then I'm going to use my gradients for this next part. And you can see we have fill options of a solid color, no fill, or a gradient. So I'm going to select gradients. I am going to actually go into my gradient and customize it a little bit. So I want this white, if I select that, I want it to be a very light neutral. And then for the black, I want that to be a very dark brown. And if that's not dark enough, we can even adjust kind of here a little bit to make it just a little bit darker. Now that's looking pretty good. All right, so I also would like to have a gradient on my stroke. So I'm going to add the same gradient on my stroke. And before I start messing with that, I'm going to actually take that stroke size up. Here's 7 point, maybe 8 point is pretty good. And then I'm going to go back to the gradient and see how we have these options on the stroke so we can apply gradient within stroke so that it looks exactly like the fill gradient, which we don't want because we want this button to have a little bit of an edge. We can apply gradient along stroke, and the gradient goes from dark to light all the way around. Now that also doesn't look quite right. So the last one is apply gradient across stroke, and that is what we actually want. Now with that, I'm going to use this kind of scaling option here to find the best look for my button. Maybe I'm going to even pull it a little bit more there. And that's looking pretty good. Now the other thing that I want to do is kind of change the direction of this gradient, this fill gradient. So if I go back to the fill, I can do that actually in the gradient options here. I could go down and change the direction. But one other thing that you can do is you can actually click in the gradient tool here and it'll show you the direction of your gradient. It'll also allow you can rotate it. You can also expand it if you click and drag this out and then move it. So if you think that you would like your gradient to be a little bit darker, you can kind of move this to be where you'd like it. All right. If you're happy with that, then we're going to click on the shape, actually go to our white direct selection, click on it, hold down your option key, hold down your shift key, hold down your option key, click, then hold down your shift key and drag that out. All right, that's looking fairly good. And actually, I'm going to go back into this stroke though, because I'm not really liking the look of that. And I am going to adjust that a little bit. Just a little too perfect. So let's try it there. But it's not too bad. Not too bad. Now you could also go in here if you really wanted to kind of add even more options. You could go in and add even more colors down here and kind of play around with that. So if I wanted to go in here and add a new color and then kind of play around with that outer stroke to kind of give it a little bit more of a harder edge in some places, I could definitely do that. So don't be afraid to play around with your gradients, but just for the sake of moving on, I'm just going to go ahead and go on here. So our next thing that we need to do to really make these look like they're on top of this fabric, we're going to actually click on both of them and we're going to go to Effect, Stylize, Drop Shadow. And really, if we click Preview here, 1 point, 1 point, and we'll blur it just a little bit. 1 point would be good. So I don't do too much because if you do too much, it looks like these buttons are way up high, and we just want them to look like they're right next to the fabric. So 1.1.1 point is good. And then once you're happy with this, you can go ahead and hit OK. All right, so there we have our buttons, but we need to have the interior holes for those buttons. So we're going to go back to our ellipse tool, and we're going to take the stroke off, click for a solid color, and we're actually going to do black, and then hold the shift key down, draw your little ellipse, go back to your direct selection, hold your option key down, and duplicate. Hold your shift key, grab both, and then you can kind of arrow around to get the right distance. When you have them both selected, you can also hold down your option key and drag those over to the other button. If you don't want to have them going the exact same direction, you can also use your free transform to kind of rotate them a little bit so they're not perfectly the same on both sides. And that's looking pretty good. All right, so we only have a few more things that we need to do here. We need to add a beak. So I'm going to go into my just regular rectangle tool, and I'm going to go ahead and draw that beak, and then make it kind of a golden color here, or kind of this orangey color. And I'm going to go hit minus to get into my minus anchor point tool, and just click on one of those anchor points to take it away. Go to A if you would like to move then that other anchor point kind of back. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to take this, and I could add another pattern to this if I wanted. And again, we're just going to do that by going to our mask here, our opacity options, making a mask. I'm just going to paste on the last one that we had, and then clicking in that, I'm going to try a different pattern. All right, that's looking pretty good. Click back on the opacity mask and make sure that you click on that gray to get off of there. All right, not looking too bad. We need to do a couple things before we move forward here. I'm going to go just on this regular shape. I'm actually going to go ahead and add a stroke of maybe this kind of dark brown. And again, just go into our stroke options, dashed line, and take the point size up a little bit. Now I could also change that point size or the dash size on there, so that, because that's a smaller area, so that could kind of make that look a bit better. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Now I need to add some thread here for my buttons. So I'm going to go into my actual brush tool, and with the brush I'm going to use a special brush here. I'm going to go down to bristle brushes and choose the bristle brush library, and I'm going to choose a 1-point brush. Go down here, take the fill away, and I'm going to choose kind of a grayish white almost. Zoom in here, and then take my point size down on my brush to 1 and just draw across here. Now, for some reason, that reset, so let me choose our 1 point again here. There we go. So, all right, let's try this again. There we go. So if you use these bristle brushes, they just tend to look a little bit more like thread. So they look a little bit more thread-like. So you can just kind of paint these across. And we're looking pretty good. All right, just a couple more things that we need to do. We're going to go back to our layers, and I'm going to lock down everything that I've just done up here. Unlock this middle layer. I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to extrude this. So I'm going to go to Effect, 3D, Extrude and Bevel. Now you want to make sure you check the preview with this, and we don't want it to look quite this harsh. So we're going to go into our options here and choose front. I am going to choose, instead of plastic shading, which is going to be very intense, I'm going to choose diffuse shading. Where it says none, I'm going to go in and choose tall round. And then 50 point is fine, but here where it says height, I'm just going to take it up a little bit. And what you'll notice is that we're getting kind of a pillowy effect in this shape here. So it's kind of becoming a little bit more three-dimensional, as if it's been kind of stuffed with fabric. So once you're happy with that, hit OK. And then we're going to do the same thing with this shape down here. So we're going to go to Effect, 3D, Extrude and Bevel. Go over here to Front. Make sure we check Preview down here. Go to Tall Round. Change this to, slightly higher height. Diffuse shading so it's not intense. And once we're happy, once it kind of just looks a little puffy, we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And that's basically it. Now if you want to, you can go and create a new layer, pull it down below all of your other layers, and just go into your shape tool here, your rectangle tool, and draw a little rectangle of color in for the background. But other than that, that's basically it. You've made a fun little patchwork owl. So experiment with these techniques, have fun, and good luck.